Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to those friends who are in China, and good evening to those friends who are in America. It is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to this Learning Technology panel organized by Penn China Education Summit 2022. The spotlight on the learning technology sector has never shined brighter. In 2022, learning technology investments were 3 times the year before, with over 20 billion in venture and growth capital entering into this space. Fueled by the influx of capital, innovations in pre-K to grade are scaling at unprecedented rates. Education is at its turning point. My name is Yuqi Wang.
My name is Shuhan Ai, and we are the Learning Technology Panel Directors for Penn China Education Summit this year. Today, we also have Minjian Zhang here as our operations specialist.
I'll be the operator for the Games for Learning track today.
I'll be the moderator for the online learning track. Minjian will also assist us hosting the roundtables at the end of each track. For any comments and questions, please feel free to leave them in our chat box, and we will select some questions to be answered in our roundtable sessions.
For a learning technology panel, we have invited 4 leaders in the learning technology field. We will discuss the effectiveness of games for learning and possible improvements of online education. For Games for Learning track, panelists include Dr. Yang Plus from New York University and Dr. Matthew Duval from University of Pennsylvania.
For online learning track, panelists include Dr. Michael Golden. He's the Executive Director and Senior Fellow at the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education. And we also have Dr. Hugh Ki-Fong. He's Associate Dean of Faculty of Education at the University of Hong Kong. Together, they will provide their perspectives and insights from their unique experience and the distinguished research to help us envision the future of education empowered by emerging learning technologies.
So this is the agenda for today. With regards to Games for Learning track, PCES Learning Technology Panel is proud to present you with a keynote on designing effective games for learning with Dr. Plus from New York University. Professor Plus has been investigating cognitive, social, and emotional design patterns for the design of effective simulations, games, augmented reality, virtual reality, and mixed reality tools for learning a wide range of topics for learners of all ages. Professor Plus is also the lead editor of Cognitive Load Theory and of the Handbook of Game-Based Learning. Without further ado, let's get it started. Let's welcome Professor Plus. Professor Plus, you're mute.
God, and I just said all the good things. Okay, welcome. I just wanted to thank the organizers for inviting me to such an important and interesting event. The Penn China Education Summit brings together different nations and people from different parts of the world. And I think now more than ever, this is important. So I'm really glad to be a part of this. I want to talk today about designing effective games for learning, something that is very dear to my heart because I've been spending a lot of time studying that. And I've done so as part of the Create Lab, where we envision, design, and study the future of learning, and the Games for Learning Institute, in which we look at games particularly for their educational benefits. I want to talk briefly about a model of designing playful learning and what makes games effective, and also how to measure learning in games today. And before we get started, I wanted to compare game-based learning to playful learning and to gamification, because those terms are often used in very different ways. And gamification, games for learning, and playful learning all start with the identification of an educational problem, right? We want to solve a problem. We want to find a better way of teaching. But in gamification, we retain the original approach and we add motivational game elements. So I may have had a worksheet at first. Now I add stars and points to it, but it's still a worksheet where I do math problems. In games for learning, though, we would rethink the learning approach and we would design a new way of learning, a new learning mechanic, and I'll talk about that later, that takes advantage of game affordances, of what games are especially good at. In playful learning, we also rethink the learning approach. We design a new way of teaching or learning, and we use some game elements, but not necessarily all of them. So in gamification, we have what we think of as mostly extrinsic rewards, unrelated to the learning task. In games for learning, we use the full range of game features, including intrinsic and extrinsic rewards. And in playful learning, it's mostly intrinsic rewards, something that actually relates to the learning content and therefore matters more. In gamification, the result is what we often call chocolate-covered broccoli. I know broccoli is good for you. We put chocolate on it so you'll eat it, but in the end, that's really not what we want. In games for learning, if we're really good, we actually get a good game out of it, a bona fide game. But in playful learning, we get enjoyable learning activities. So when should we use it? Well, gamification, we sometimes have to use when we just can't change the original approach. Games for learning, we should use in cases where games are really needed or offer new learning opportunities. And playful learning, well, I believe we should use that everywhere because everybody deserves an enjoyable learning opportunity. So looking at that then, how do we create playful learning activities? And to me, that is a type of learning, and it has a number of different types of engagement that go with it. One is, of course, the cognitive engagement, the processing of the information. But another one is the physical engagement, me actually doing things physically. I sometimes just move the mouse, but in some games, I move my whole body, and then it's an embodied experience. We have a social and cultural engagement. And of course, we have an affective engagement where we emotionally respond to the game. And we can use a number of different game elements to do that. And I will talk about those a little bit more in a moment. But it's not just the knowledge and skills that are to be included, but the incentive systems, the learning mechanics, the assessment mechanics, the aesthetic design, the narrative, and the musical score all come together to generate those kind of engagement experiences. And we do have theoretical foundations for that. We have affect and motivation, cognition, and social-cultural effects and models at work that can be used for the design of games. And my research is mostly concerned with expanding those models and understanding how they affect game-based learning and how we can design accordingly. So I want to take you on a little journey, but first I wanted to say that what we actually do here with game-based learning matters. It is something that we've used in Project Hope, where we helped Syrian refugee children in Turkey get instruction in how to code in the Turkish language. They played our executive functions training game to train their cognitive skills. And they also played Minecraft as a mental health intervention. And we found in a month-long intervention that we saw benefits on all 4 of those goals. So it can work in the real world, and it can work very well, especially when there are other adverse situations where learning is difficult. So what makes for effective games for learning? The first thing that comes to mind is that games are such connected and contextualized learning environments where we have what we call situated problem-solving spaces. And that is perhaps best explained by looking at the opposite. When your math teacher comes and says, today we'll learn about quadratic equations, but doesn't tell you why. In a game, you might learn about them too, but in context that matters to you. And so here we designed a game, for instance, that's an experiential learning opportunity for artificial intelligence. And this is designed in English and Chinese. And we're actually just about to test it in China, where you experience, in this case, search, uninformed search, informed search, optimization, and machine learning, and you use it to solve the problems that the game provides, and therefore you care about it. We also have, as essential part of that, the learning mechanics, the moment-to-moment learning activity of the player. We could think of it as a learning strategy. And they are based on learning theory, and they're creating these patterns of repeated behavior that we're using, where we then build game mechanics that correspond to what learning designers have said are good learning mechanics. So that is the core of making that possible. We start by thinking about what good learning would look like and then build games around that. Here's an example, a geometry game for angles and quadrilaterals, and you see there are a number of givens and a number of angles that you need to solve for so that your friend who is imprisoned there by the leads can be freed because they can traverse this scaffold. And we have shown that it matters what kind of mechanics you use for that and how you engage the learner in this experience. Here's another learning mechanic. What we think of as mechanic here on the very left is a game for factoring. Here we have a solo play on the left. In the middle, we have a collaborative play. On the right, we have a competitive play. So the mechanics are either you play by yourself, you play with someone, you play against someone. And again, what we do is we study what makes those different conditions more effective or less effective. And we then derive from that an understanding of what game designers should do when they design these kind of games. This is a Kinect-based game, the Microsoft Kinect. We worked with Microsoft Game Studios on putting this book, Children Make Terrible Pets, which is for beginning readers, into a learning experience where children, as you see on top, would enact the sight words that they were supposed to learn. And we actually found that that was as effective as the gold standard as reading with the caretaker when you actually enacted that. So there was this physical activity when you enacted that with a game. Another way of making games effective for learning is to recognize that games actually use emotions and that emotions enhance learning. That's another strand of research that we have done in our lab, and we call that emotional design. And what we find is that emotional design is the use of a range of design features with the goal to induce emotions in learners to enhance learning. So what we do is we find that emotions increase retrieval of information, increase creativity, facilitate intrinsic motivation, and enhance learning outcomes. That is our research. So when you induce a positive emotion in the player, you get better learning outcomes, and nothing else was added. We just changed the design so there are positive emotions. You can do that, for instance, by using round shapes and warm colors, and they positive impact emotions and enhance learning outcomes, and that's been replicated in a number of studies. And when you look at emotional design factors, you could also use the visual design, the interaction design, the narrative, the playfulness, the sound. All of those help you, and the incentives, all of those help you induce the kind of emotions in learners. So as an example, we built this game All You Can Eat Tea with those warm colors and round shapes that trains your cognitive skills. And we also did a study where we compared in this game warm colors and round shapes for the game characters on the left, which we call the hot version, and square colors and black and white, square shapes and black and white colors on the right. And we actually find that the left works better, and you have a better post-test score in executive functions, especially for older adolescents and low EF learners, low executive functions learners. So it matters what emotions we experience, and games are really good at that. Another really strong point for games is that games are able to adapt and personalize the experience for each learner. And this is important because we differ along a number of variables, and games can accommodate learners in a number of interesting ways. And when we look at adaptivity as the ability of a learning system to diagnose a range of learner variables and then to accommodate a learner's specific needs by making the appropriate adjustments to the experience, then we have this kind of adaptive game that notices how well you're doing. If you need a little extra time, it gives you that. If you're doing really well, it might speed up, is one way of adjusting. But what else can we do? So we watch the learner experience, the learner performance. We diagnose a number of affective, cognitive, motivational, or social cultural variables. And then we think about how we can make that adaptive within the game. And there are a number of different places where that could happen in the learning process. In the middle here, you see the core learning activity. What scaffolds or cues do I give? What feedback or guidance? What rehearsal schedule do I use? What interaction types and so on? All of those can be used to design for adaptivity and for adaptive learning experiences. And this is important because when you think about what adaptive systems exist, there are actually not that many of those that are being used. So this is a taxonomy that we designed just to show what's possible. And there's a paper out where that's actually expanded quite a bit. And so anybody who thinks about designing adaptive games, I really would encourage them to think beyond just saying, okay, you solved 3 problems correctly, now we're making it a little bit harder, right? There's many more ways to adapt. For instance, you could adapt for different affective states, the different emotional states of the learners. What if you could respond to boredom or frustration in a game? You could adapt for different motivational variables. What if you have learners who are less motivated? And what do? How do you motivate them a little bit more versus other learners who are more motivated? They might not need that extra motivation. So that's an article that just came out a couple of years ago. Learning is also a social process, and games that tap into that capability are very effective. And you see, I'm showing a couple of games where in Minecraft or in Fortnite, there's a community hub. There, a lot of the game happens actually outside of the game, which is why Jim G, one of the evangelists of game-based learning, is talking about games with a capital G, right? Works for Jim and G, or G better, but it also works for games. The capital G means all the things around the game, the community around the game, the writing, the making of videos around the game, etc., becomes part of the experience that we need to take into account when we actually see that what games can do. It's not just what happens in the game, it's what happens outside of the game as well. Another aspect is that learning is a social process, and we can use that for intergenerational learning. So often children just go to school and parents assume that's where the learning happens and now I'm done. But what happens when we bring children and parents or children and their caretakers together to learn together, to have those experiences together and to have something where each can learn from each other, right? We need entirely new pedagogies. This is an exhibit in the New York Hall of Science in Queens that we were involved with as part of an NSF-funded project. And here you see that participants, both parents and children, you see a parent on the left, a child on the right, interacting with this through Kinect. So it's gesture-based, and you can redirect the water. You can make it rain in one part, or you can make it drought in another part, and then you see what happens. You see the water cycle in action, and you see all the way in the back is a virtual waterfall, and it even spills out virtually on the floor of the exhibit. So we're integrating the virtual and the real, and we're giving parents and children something to experience together and to learn together. We studied that with the game that I already showed, with the social mode of play, and we found that it enhances situational interest. That's your interest in the actual activity. And research has shown that an enhanced situational interest eventually results in enhanced individual interest, and that would be the interest in the subject matter. So for instance, a student who doesn't like math, apparently there are a few, they might like a math game a lot. And so they play the math game, and after a while, they're like, well, no, math might actually be fun. And so that is one of the benefits of games, to take the situational interest of playing math game is fun into math might actually be interesting. We recently built simulations in response to the COVID pandemic that show how cells, plant cells, animal cells, prokaryotic cells are formed by using organelles. We looked at mitosis, and eventually we look at protein synthesis and how viruses use a cell to replicate themselves. And this is all a virtual reality environment in which multiple learners in middle school learn together about those biology or scientific phenomena. So the social aspect of learning is something that makes games effective. Then, of course, learning and innovation skills in games as a result of a community of practice. I talked about the fact that games actually create community. Games make people, embrace new activities outside of games because they liked what they were doing in game, and then they want to do it outside of the game. Games create game designers. We run a coding for game design summer program for high school students here in New York City, which is very successful, and people are very excited to turn their passion for playing games into a passion for making games. And so this participatory learning culture to draw students in, to give them something interesting to do, is what games do exceedingly well. Games are also important because they can reflect a student's identity, character, and citizenship. And here you see specific games like SimCity EDU, where you can learn about making cities, learning about environmental issues, etc., that can reflect your values and your interests, and again, form this community of practice. So games, those larger games, are very good for that as well. And finally, embedded assessment of learning in a game is something that is incredibly important for us, because the one thing that as a researcher and as a parent of two students who went through the New York City public school system, something I'm incredibly frustrated about is how we test what our students know. And the fact that we give standardized tests. I know in China, you prepare for your college entrance test for years, right? And you spend so much time preparing for a test only to reach the next level of education. right? It's a high stakes test, so I understand why people are doing it. It's something you must do. But is this really the best way of testing what people know? And the answer is very clearly no. Because the reason why there are so many tips on how to beat a test is that it's all about the test and not about your knowledge. And so what if we had ways of assessing learning as part of your learning activities, right? Where we constantly measure what you learned, how you performed, etc. We give you credit for that throughout the learning process, throughout the semester, throughout the year. So in the end, we don't need to measure it because we already know. And there are systems available right now. Some of them are games, others are not, that do that. And one of them is Cerigo, which is a learning engine that uses a skilled spaced repetition paradigm, where items that you have learned previously, every now and then they come back and they show them to you, and you can show the system that you still know those items by responding to the questions. And that to me is a far better way of accumulating a lot of longitudinal evidence for your knowledge rather than giving high stakes tests. We use in games, we use assessment mechanics for that. And those are the essential moment-to-moment assessment related activities that test what you know. So they're sometimes different from learning mechanics where we teach you something new. Here we create patterns of repeated behavior that measures what you know. And because we measure them, now we are having test theoretical considerations, not learning theory behind those items, right? So that can be built into games. And if we do that, we can have really powerful learning analytics coming out of games that help us understand how much a person knows. When we do this research on games, we have this research progression where we initially start with ideation, where we do user observation and other related studies. Then we use user research to test our ideas of what a good game might look like. And then we build a prototype and do this value-added research where we add a component to a game and we study its effectiveness. We change the emotional impact, we change other things, we change adaptivity and so on. And when we have that, we do cognitive or affective consequences research where we want to see what the effect is of a game in quasi or experimental designs. And only then would we run an efficacy trial or an effectiveness study in a large randomized controlled trial. So this is our research progression that we use in the lab. And we spend a lot of time on the user research and value-added research. And that's what makes a game eventually effective. And then you can show that in your RCTs. So in conclusion, well-designed games can be effective learning environments, and the specifics for the designs should be based on a theoretical model such as the one that I introduced early on, which is really a model that brings in all the other theories into the design process. And the important thing is to balance the game features versus the content, right? We need to make sure that it's just enough game type behavior in the game so it's fun, but that it doesn't distract from the content. And there's many different ways for doing that. I spent an entire semester here at NYU teaching about designing simulations and games for learning, where we cover that a lot. And then learning outcomes can be measured in a number of ways, but user research and value-added research should be investigated first. And with that, I wanted to say, if you're interested, the Handbook of Game-Based Learning has many smart authors contributing great chapters to that. And I wanted to thank you, and I wanted to thank the organizers again for inviting me.
Thank you, Professor Plas. That was an engaging and meaningful introduction of designing effective games for learning. I believe our audience must have learned a lot from your talk. So we will have a roundtable discussion at the end of this Games for Learning track. So we will speak with you later at around 9:15. Okay, next, PCS Learning Technology panel is proud to present you with a keynote on video games, learning, and metaverse with Dr. Duval from the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Duval has worked as a computer programmer, high school teacher, instructional designer, and a writer. All these experiences have informed his perspective on teaching, learning, and technology. His research interests include designing technology-enhanced learning experiences, game-based learning, computational thinking, teacher professional development, and corporate training. So let's dive in. Let's welcome Dr. Duval.
Hello. Thank you, Penn China Education Summit, for inviting me to talk, and also to all of the attendees who are joining us. I'd like to offer my apologies for not being there in person. I am traveling to another conference for the weekend, so as this is playing, I'm actually probably on the road and wasn't sure that I would have access to the internet or be in a place where I physically could present right now. But I do appreciate the opportunity to offer my talk in this format because I'm very excited to discuss video games, learning, and the metaverse. I'd like to start by discussing a project I worked on at Drexel University with Dr. Frank Lee and Dr. Brian Smith. This was called Skyscraper Games. Now, my role on the project was to design a year-long professional development program for middle school teachers. And throughout the school year, they worked with their 5th through 8th grade students to use our game development tool to design and code old-school, pixel-based video games. If you think about classic video games like Tetris, Pac-Man, or Space Invaders, those were all inspirations for this project. What made the program unique and exciting, besides the fact that middle schoolers were using Python to program video games they had created, was the final event, a live game jam in downtown Philadelphia, where the students and the community played their games using the 29-story Sierra Center as the display. One student, Cynthia, said she hoped the event, in her words, could also get other people into coding because it's a huge skyscraper. People would look at it and say, wow, it's a game up there, and then come to see these middle schoolers coding on it, and so they might be inspired to actually start coding. I thought her words were very inspiring, and one of the goals of the project was to go beyond having teachers incorporate video games into traditional instructional practices, and instead, as Seymour Papert, Yasmin Kafai, and many other great scholars have suggested, asking those students to actually construct video games as artifacts that showed their improving disciplinary practices and knowledge in game design and computer programming. Another unique aspect of Skyscraper Games was our participants. In addition to being middle schoolers, more than 2/3 of the students identified as female. And as you'll hear in a moment with a brief video I'm going to show you, this was part of Dr. Lee's vision from the beginning, to create not only community events to raise awareness about game design and programming, but also to purposely include folks who are historically underrepresented in those disciplines.
Fill is a game where there's 2 pixels. There's a red and there's a blue pixel. The blue pixel is you.
You have to try not to get caught, and when you get caught, you turn green, and you gotta fill up the whole screen.
But the whole purpose is for you to fill in the board so it can be one solid color.
It was fun coding the games.
In the Dot Man, you want to make it through the maze without being caught. Same way Pac-Man wants to get all the dots before he's caught by a ghost. You can use the arrow keys or the gamer keys, WASD, to move around. You want to navigate through the maze. You don't want to hit a wall or a dot, which is part of the maze. And if the other player, the dot, catches you, your game is over.
We agreed on making a game like Centipede. You're like the shooter guy, and you have to shoot the Caterpie, and you have to try to destroy it before it gets to the bottom and eats you up.
It doesn't move like the Centipede in the game Centipede. It moves down the screen, and then once it reaches the end, it goes back to the beginning.
I call it Invasion of the Dots. So in the game, it's like a bunch of red dots, and your character is a blue dot, and it's trying to defend against the red dots.
So the name of our game is called Falling.
The character itself isn't technically falling, it's rather the obstacles are moving up.
You move the sprite around. You try not to get hit by the red ones.
When you hit the red blocks, it degrades a part of your character, and when you hit the green blocks, it makes part of your character green. And every time you get all, since you have 4 kind of like lives on your character, every time you get all for red, part of the walls on the side come in,
and then you also get more of the blocks coming up, which makes the game harder.
If you want to beat the game, you're probably going to want to have a good knowledge of old classic games.
In the past, the games were my own projects. I did Pong in 2013 and Tetris in 2014. It kind of reinforces my belief in kids and the creativity of the kids to see original games made by the wonderful kids who collaborate with us, wonderful middle school kids and their teachers. With the help of Brandywine folks, we're able to have this festival where we had classic arcade games, we had DJ, we also had games from independent game companies in Philadelphia. So it was a celebration. It became much more than what I initially imagined.
What was really surprising to me was, we kind of thought that kids could do this, middle school kids, but we had never really put that to the test. And so this was like the first time where kids were working from start to finish to create the games and code them themselves.
I think when they were on the computer, they were just imagining this moment, right? And then this was the moment. So one of them said it was like seeing their baby brought into the world.
This was a satisfying, culminating activity. Really allowed the students to have that final event where they could see their game being played up on the skyscraper. It was one of a kind.
I don't know, I think just seeing the overall final product was just so awesome because it was just so minimized on the computer screen. But up there, it's real, it's there, it's so big, it's great.
So we've been waiting for a long time to see our games on the building. So it was really exciting to see my game and actually get to play it on a huge skyscraper.
It was cool to see how everyone made a different games, even though it's the same building.
It took a lot of class time and a lot of lunches in Dr. Johnson's classroom. I think it's really cool, and I hope I motivated other people to do the same thing and get interested in coding.
So, obviously the scale of the huge display is really cool, but what I really noticed while we were here tonight was the reaction of this community of people coming together to support these kids who had developed these games. And you could hear the reactions when somebody would do something really cool, complete the level, or if somebody almost got there and then didn't make it, the gasp, the collective gasp from the crowd. And I think that's sort of part of what Frank really has envisioned is getting more people together in a communal setting to design and develop programs like this. So hopefully that gives you a little insight into what Skyscraper Games was about. You could hear and see how the kids were thinking like game designers and computer programmers and really taking on those roles. Much different than if we simply said we would use games to teach kids about specific concepts such as mathematics operations in class. Another theme throughout those slides was community, which brings us to the next part of this talk. How can we create communities where kids both design, program, and play video games, but do it virtually, which would allow for a much broader scale and participation? So let's talk a bit more about video games and learning. I have 3 kids who are 9, 7, and 5 years old, so I definitely know about Roblox, sometimes more than I want to. But in case you haven't heard of it before, Roblox was created in 2004 and has since grown to a community of millions of players who are playing millions of games in the Roblox environment. And those games, they're all created by members of the Roblox community as well. So you can simply be a consumer, or you can be a producer, or you could be both. These games are 3-dimensional, multiplayer, and multi-genre. And the Roblox universe even has its own currency, Robux, which players can use to upgrade their experiences and which game creators are paid in. Currently, in case you're curious, 1 Robux is worth 0.0035 US dollars. And when I said it's a community, that includes more than games. In 2020, Lil Nas X performed a virtual concert that had more than 30 million views, as one example. Roblox, similar to what Microsoft has done with Minecraft, has started creating educational offerings to help teachers use the Roblox Studio in their classrooms. In 2021, the Boston Museum of Science teamed up with NASA and Roblox to create a virtual experience that allows players to explore the International Space Station, the Moon, and even a fictional Mars settlement. Roblox is approaching education with a combination of the instructionist approach, where games are used to teach concepts to students, and the constructionist approach we talked about earlier, where students can create games to explain and develop their understanding of concepts, along with developing design and coding skills. Roblox is a sneak preview of what the metaverse could look like. Now, there's still a lot of debate about what exactly the metaverse is and also what it will be in the future. Some people say it's only 3D virtual worlds, including fully immersive environments that users experience via headsets and haptic gloves, and possibly even more specialized equipment as the technology advances. Others say that 2D worlds and even augmented reality experiences should be a part of it. Who controls the metaverse is also an important discussion, and questions around decentralization and who gets to create the technical standards, along with whether it should be platform dependent or platform independent, and many more, are still in debate. Regardless, most people agree that the metaverse is coming, so now is the time for us to dream about what it could be and how it might be used to transform learning. I'm going to use the rest of this talk to describe 3 key possibilities for the metaverse, if we're bold enough to take advantage of this design opportunity. Possibility 1 involves reimagining education. The traditional educational system relies on a view of knowledge as discrete, disconnected concepts and multiple choice assessments that are valid instruments for gauging learning. The metaverse could provide opportunities for students to adopt disciplinary practices in order to achieve a greater understanding of disciplinary knowledge in all sorts of disciplines: English language arts, social studies, science, mathematics, and more. Imagine if, rather than measuring students' computational thinking skills using multiple choice, contrived questions, instead, the students developed a video game to show what they were learning. Imagine if, instead of a teacher describing the food chain in a science class, students were immersed in a virtual world where they got to see the food chain in action, make predictions, and verify that what they understood was true. Now, those examples aren't new. Researchers, teachers, and designers have tried variations of these out over the years. Some of the underlying philosophies and theories about teaching and learning have been developed by many scholars in many settings. But what could be different now is that we have the technology to carry this off at a greater scale. One of the biggest criticisms of the Skyscraper Games project that we heard was not every school has access to a giant skyscraper with LED lights that they can use as a display. But if you imagine a metaverse where anybody can build a world that has more than one giant skyscraper, and then you could program games to be played on that display, you can start to see the possibilities that we could have. The next possibility is promoting diversity and inclusion. So the metaverse offers an opportunity for society in general, but also education particularly, to move beyond diversity as a slogan or a catchphrase and make it an integral part of the design of this virtual community. In the example of Skyscraper Games, we were able to meet our diversity goals, but only by planning to do so. One important consideration for the metaverse is that All of the discussions around what the metaverse could and should be, as well as the development of the metaverse infrastructure itself, should include diverse representatives. People from different races, different ethnicities, different ability statuses, different genders, different ages, different religions, and more. Diversity and culturally relevant practices should not be added in as an afterthought, but should be carefully designed into the metaverse from the beginning. Finally, the third possibility is creating more equitable systems. While the metaverse offers many exciting advances, we should also consider how to avoid issues that are already present in our educational systems, where the rich and well-connected have access to the best resources, while others have limited or no access at all. The pandemic has highlighted equity issues related to technology, particularly here in the United States. It's important that we consider from the beginning how we will ensure access to the metaverse for anyone who wants it, especially if we plan to take advantage of its opportunities to revolutionize learning. In the end, it must be available for everyone. Thank you for your time and attention. There's always more that we could think about and discuss, but I hope this talk will serve as a useful seed for growing those conversations. I encourage you to think boldly and design thoughtfully. The metaverse is just emerging. Let's create the future we want to live in. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Duval. That was an inspiring keynote. Next, it will be our first roundtable discussion for our Games for Learning track. I'll pass it to my colleague, Ming Jian.
Okay, so hi guys. So welcome to the roundtable, and welcome back, Dr. Plus and Dr. Duval. Are you guys here?
Yes, I'm.
Okay, Dr. Duval, are you here?
Yeah, I'm joining. I'm in the car, so I apologize if my connection is not great, but I'm here.
All right, understood. Safe trip. So yeah, the procedure of this roundtable is really simple. In this 15-minute roundtable, we will be first answering some questions, and then we'll see whether the crowd has some questions for you guys. So let's just jump right in. So the first question I have for you guys is, how can commercial games be successfully implemented in modern classroom so that they can be educational? Dr. Plus, do you want to share your thoughts first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a lot of research that shows that commercial games have a number of positive outcomes. Even those games that your parents wouldn't really want you to play because they use the Unreal Engine, there's a lot of blood and gore, actually have been shown to enhance your perception skills, your executive functions, and so on. So it's quite remarkable what some games are able to do. As far as the classroom is concerned, we're seeing actually this really interesting movement that some of the game companies move into this space. And of particular note is Ubisoft, the Canadian company. And they've used games like Assassin's Creed, Prince of Persia, Far Cry, and those beautifully rendered worlds, they make available to educators to say, don't tell them about Greece and the old Greeks or the Romans, go there and experience it for yourself. And that to me is a really interesting move. Not everybody can do that. Not every world lends itself to being used in educational settings. But we've seen that with SimCity, we've seen that with other games, though we have to ask why they weren't more successful and why places like Glass Lab had to close. But there certainly is a lot of potential for that.
Yes, that is interesting. Definitely, I have, as a person who are really into game, I myself also play some of the Assassin's Creed. I have to say, like being able to riding on a camel to Egypt, to experience Egypt as a first person in a history mode is definitely something that I would encourage all history students would experience themselves, because it is a way better curriculum than the textbook. So Dr. Duval, do you have something to add here?
I mean, I would agree with Dr. Plass and what his comments covered many of the things I would have said. I think the other thing to consider is, for instance, there was a game called like Theme Park Tycoon, which is a good game just for thinking about like systems thinking, right? So just generally, and so teachers could use a game like that, I think, often to make it more acceptable for their students or for their administrators in the classroom. They need to think carefully about ways to incorporate that's meaningful for the students and that also builds on, you know, what they're expecting the students to learn from it.
Yes, yes, definitely. Okay, so that is actually our first question. And the second question goes to Dr. Plass, actually, because Dr. Duval has shared his insight about the metaverse and his implication on the education specifically. As an expert in like mixed reality or XR educational games, what do you think of it?
Yeah, I'm actually a metaverse skeptic. And not because I don't believe in everything that we just heard by Matt Duval. I thought that was great. I just am worried that the companies that are building the metaverse aren't thinking about education. They're thinking about monetizing us as the users. And the question is whether we can turn that around. I'm also a very avid reader of cyberpunk novels. I love Neil Stephenson. I love William Gibson. I read Ernest Cline's Ready Player One. There isn't a single book out there in which the metaverse isn't a very dystopian environment. And so, you know, I join Matt in his call to make this the kind of place we want it to be. But I'm deeply concerned that we might not be strong enough as an education community to make that happen. I do wish that we can. The kind of research that we're doing, and that we're here at NYU, we have the holodeck research grant that's an NSF-funded equipment grant, where we're building something very similar to what now is called the metaverse. There are some amazing experiences that are to be had. I showed some of our collaborative science simulations that could be part of a metaverse. But like I said, we would have to be all very diligent in having an influence on what that looks like. And I hope many of the people listening today and are part of this as students or potential designers think about that when they get the opportunity to contribute to the metaverse. You know, what we do, each designer, each person who contributes something to it will eventually be responsible for what it becomes as an environment.
Yes, I definitely agree. A lot of like the metaverse, like not only fiction, but also movies, they also tend to have like dystopia ending. And usually, I believe you are right. Sometimes we are not sure whether these pioneers in metaverse companies are trying to actually focusing on better future for education, or they are trying to establish a better asset for future monetization. So this is like some doubts about metaverse is still like really popular among these days. So we will probably have to wait and see on the future development of the metaverse. And let's take one question from the crowd. Okay, let me see. All right, here's a question from Caesar Lee. Conventionally, parents are very conservative with game, especially in Asia. Even enough the education organization in China agreed to combine games with education, chances are parents will protest. How would you convince parents who are old school that we can have a game-based education in the future?
Matt, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I mean, I can give some thoughts. This is always, you know, a challenge that we face, I think, as game designers. It was interesting on the Skyscraper Games project, the website we used for our tool that students used to develop it was called Skyscraper Games. And we had to work with some of the school districts to get it unblocked because they automatically blocked any website with the word game in it. So there is sort of a stigma attached, which is why, you know, you'll get people who explicitly market educational games versus or serious games as opposed to, you know, commercial games, and make that distinction because that makes it somewhat more acceptable. I think part of what you have to plan for as if you're an educator is just to really be a strong advocate and also to provide information, as much information and as many examples as you can of, you know, why this is a good idea, how it's going to be implemented, and how it's going to result in greater learning, in order to overcome that skepticism. But it is definitely, you have to be an advocate and sort of you know, go out of your way to promote it and to think through really how and why this is going to improve the learning experience for the students.
All right, thank you for your answer. This is definitely a really typical situation or typical question that is faced by a lot of Asian families, Asian schools. And to be exactly, like in Chinese high school, or at least majority of Chinese schools, the phones or any like electronic devices are forbidden inside the school. So probably it's almost impossible for the students who will have a chance to actually play any games at all. And also, but I am positive on the future development, because as we are like, as we can see in the educational development, especially in educational technology, a lot of like applications in the format of mobile app, they're taken form as a game, but they also are showing the really great educational resource to provide to those Chinese parents. So I guess in the future, when the generation are changing, when they're for the future parents, they will be more open to see like effective educational games inside the schools. So Dr. Plus, do you have anything to add on?
Well, I mean, Matt has already said many important things about that, but I think the goal or the way we approach that is by research, by showing all the benefits of games, and then to publish this research not just in journals, but also in more you know, events that are oriented toward the public. I'm originally from Germany, and German parents are very much the same as what you've described from Chinese parents. They just think it's a waste of time and they don't want their kids to play. And so we need to convince them why we would use games. And I'm just typing in an answer to another question about, you know, can we learn research skills in games? Part of that is also to say, we're actually not proposing to change the entire education system into big, you know, all games. That's not the idea at all. What we're proposing is to say there are specific types of learning for specific learners where games can make a difference. And we need to understand when that is the case. And we need to understand that a very high performing learner may not want the game. They may be able to learn what they can do very well without games, but some subjects might be harder for them, and then a game would be useful, or some are harder to put in context, and then a game is useful. But it's not always the solution. No single educational approach is the answer to all of our educational problems. It will be a combination of many different approaches, and good teachers know that. That's what good teachers do, right? They bring different learning experiences into the classroom, and we just argue that games can be one of them, not replacing the others.
Definitely. I'm really glad to hear that not only Chinese parents are really harsh on the games. Now German parents are wearing the same category. So, all right, thank you for your question. Thank you for your answer. I have one personal question for Dr. Klaus, and since your background is on like mixed reality and also virtual reality games, educational games, how do you think, it might be a really complex complex question to answer, how do you manage to lower the cognitive load on those games, that formats where my students might have never seen before, like for example, like HoloLens 2, HoloLens, like mixed reality, that may be really surprising for students, and it will be too much to process at the same time. How do you think you can balance that?
Well, that's a really good question. And one approach we use is that when we design those experiences, we try to use as many very intuitive ways of interacting as we can, right? So if you have to learn everything about the environment, how you interact, what things mean, and so on, then extraneous cognitive load increases, and it's very hard to actually get to solving the problem or working with the learning material. But if we're designing in a way that it's intuitive, that people look at something and says, I think I should be able to grab that. And when they do, they can, right? That we use the affordances of the system to communicate with the learner what the system can do. So it essentially tells you about its capabilities rather than making you work hard for that. That is one part of it. And the other part is really to make the decision, is this in this moment the right environment? And especially for virtual reality, there are some very clear use cases when it's useful. One of them is when it's spatial relations, right? So if there's anything spatial about it, that's a really useful case. But if you just wanted to have a conference where everybody has a poster and you put text on a poster, don't make it a virtual reality environment. You know, you're using the wrong environment for the wrong purpose. And so often that increases cognitive load, because then people are like, there must be something more here. And in the end, there isn't. But it is a very important design goal to do just what you described, which is to reduce cognitive load during learning. Interestingly, often we think of specific design elements, especially in games, as inducing load. Emotional design, motivation elements. From a purely cognitive load perspective, they're increasing your load, but from a more holistic learning perspective, they're actually enhancing your motivation, or they're putting you in a positive emotional space. So we're currently rethinking cognitive load theory to incorporate emotion and motivation, which it currently doesn't. And to hopefully then have a better way of thinking about cognitive load and realizing that certain elements aren't extraneous load that unnecessarily add to your processing demands. They actually have a function and they're useful in the game or in the virtual world.
All right. Thank you very much for your response. That was really insightful. Okay, so that is actually all for the first track of our roundtable. So thank you again, Dr. Plus and Dr. Duval, for your time. And thank you for both. And I will hand to my colleague to move on to the second track of tonight's agenda.
Yeah, thank you, Mingjian, and welcome to our education technology panel, online education track. And the next speaker is Dr. Michael Golden. And Michael Golden is a proven education leader committed to education reform. And he's the executive director and senior fellow at the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education. He brings his expertise in the convergence of business, technology, and education. Dr. Golden also launched and leads Penn Catalyst. Besides, he is also the co-founder and serves as CEO of ED Curious, a nonprofit corporation that provides project-based courses and professional development aimed at motivating students to become motivated, self-confident, and successful in their learning. Now, let's welcome Dr. Michael Golden.
Thank you, Alice. It's great to be here. Good morning in China and good evening in the US. I'm thrilled to be able to communicate with all of you today a little bit about education technology more broadly than online education, and then we're going to talk a little bit about online education as well. So let's get started. Let me share my screen. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the power of EdTech, that EdTech really has the chance and the power to transform education. It enables students in rural Pennsylvania to take Mandarin, even though their school doesn't have a Mandarin teacher. It lets students in rural China do chemistry experiments without any lab equipment. And it permits those two sets of students to work on projects together, from their classrooms through video connections and share documents. So while sometimes synchronous and sometimes asynchronous, it really is opening the world to new ways of online learning. It also supports teachers in personalizing how they think about their instruction and how they can enable all of their students to progress at their own pace in their own competencies. We love the fact that it connects homes and schools and parents and teachers and students and tutors and university prospects with admissions officers while going on virtual campus tours. EdTech gives us the chance to build community. It provides connections to working professionals and career possibilities. As we heard from the gaming panel, it provides wearable technologies and virtual heart surgery experiences and a variety of media tools for learners to become digital storytellers and documentarians and artists. The possibilities are endless. It enables us to all be here together today. And these opportunities are reflected in some amazing investments in EdTech and venture capital. So let me share a little bit about what has happened in the market to EdTech recently. Here are some slides from Holland IQ. And in these charts, you can see that EdTech venture capital has reached 3 times its pre-pandemic investment levels of 2021. And it's accelerating startups around the world with over $20 billion in funding. It's fueled by massive US and European investment surges and a significant growth in the Indian market, which all collectively covered an $8 billion investment collapse from China, and that managed to achieve a record. So you can see here by region that the EdTech collapse in China was offset by surges in the US and across Europe, and now India is Asia's investment leader, surpassing Europe as a whole. And I know those of you in China have a good sense of why this collapse has happened in the past year, because EdTech doesn't work on its own. It works within systems, it works within policy, it works within government, and all of these things have to come together. And that's actually the context and the perfect environment for Catalyst. So let me introduce you to the work we do here at the Catalyst Center. Catalyst is a center for global education innovation, and our mission is to connect people and ideas and to develop novel and meaningful ways to address innovation in worldwide education. We work at the nexus of education, business, and technology with research as the strong differentiator in our effort. And in doing this work, we often work with education entrepreneurs across a continuum of programming. That includes everything from a startup day where they generate ideas to boot camps and workshops. And then we connect these entrepreneurs to researchers, to practitioners, and to policymakers through a series of programs. One of these programs we had last year is highlighted here. It's called the Symposium for How Innovations Flourish. And it featured sessions on everything from EdTech disruption for equity, student voices from young change makers, to systemic reform and scaling innovation across systems and across nations. And all that leads up to our signature program here at Catalyst, the Milken Penn GSE Education Business Plan Competition. We're now in our 13th year, and we've given out over $1.5 million in awards and prizes. And our winners have gone on to raise more than $150 million in capital for their ventures. And I'll just showcase the variety of winners from last year, because I think that'll give you a sense of what's happening in EdTech and how EdTech is driving this reform and transformation of education. The first prize, grand prize winner, Readly, developed a platform that uses artificial intelligence to improve academic outcomes by listening to students read and providing them real-time feedback. The other winners last year include Homeworks Trenton. Homeworks Trenton is a community-based after-school residential program that provides academic and social emotional enrichment activities while empowering marginalized high school girls of color. Weird Enough Productions is a social impact organization that empowers young people through diverse stories told through a variety of media and turns young people from underserved communities into superheroes. And finally, Ninja Kids is an initiative that presents children with informative and enriching educational game-based learning experiences across all of Africa. So if you're listening and you have a venture that has a startup, applications are going to open next week for our 2022 competition, and you can find the application at educationcompetition.org. So we encourage you to apply. We also have just launched our Catapult Virtual Accelerator to support education entrepreneurs in all stages of development to deploy innovative solutions for worldwide impact. Ventures grow through access to robust content, through individualized coaches and mentors, through personalized learning pathways that include translation of knowledge and research to practice, and through community support. And we're planning to announce our first Catapult cohort in the next couple weeks. Catalyst is also the home and Penn GSC at large for the Harold W. McGraw Jr. Prize in Education. And this recognizes individuals and their efforts to elevate the human potential in education in 3 categories: pre-K-12 education, higher education, and learning science research worldwide. Think of it like the Nobel Prize for Education Innovation. And we're shining a spotlight on innovators who are making lasting advancements for students around the world and advancing innovation in education through a variety of programming with these McGraw Prize winners. And finally, I just want to briefly mention a couple other programs that we have at Catalyst that cut across all sectors that serve educators, entrepreneurs, researchers, policymakers, investors, business leaders, practitioners, all with a stake in the power of education to create opportunities for all learners. We convene people to imagine the future of higher education, the future of work, and how teaching and learning will shift to prepare learners for the 4th Industrial Revolution. We've led the training of our faculty to teach remotely in 1 week in 2020 in March, and across the subsequent months, we're learning how online learning initiatives across and within Penn will be able to be supported, and then ultimately outside of Penn and across the world. We flipped the model of research practice partnerships on its head to identify problems of practice in the field, university presidents, school leaders, all coming with their issues, and bring resources, faculty expertise, and a proven improvement science model to help them address it. And then finally, we work with systems across several countries to create vibrant 21st century learning environments that are based on and include online learning, hybrid and blended models, and work with over 287 districts just in our region alone, multiple times a month to provide professional development to systems leaders. So I want to spend a little bit of time, I know we don't have too much time today, to give you one example of making large-scale systems change with educational technology. And I think what's important here is using education technology and online learning as a tool to make a difference, not as the goal, but as a method to either imagine things that have never existed before or to enhance processes that have existed. So former job, as Alice mentioned, I was formerly the Deputy Secretary in China. Think of that as the Deputy Minister of Education in the state of Pennsylvania. And we decided we wanted to launch a new program to create reform across all high school students across the state. In order to do that, we needed to create a systems change mechanism with ed technology and digital technologies leading the promise and leading that transformation. So for example, we started by creating a program with shared leadership at all levels, which we called the Getting to One Summit, where teams from districts came together to form one vision in their mind of how they could come together. And then we established a unified vision and a culture of trust by giving grants to certain districts to create what we called digital learning districts. Then we recognize that the principal in the school is the key instructional leader. So we created superintendent and principal leadership academies and technology leadership programs. And with teachers as the crucial person activating learning in the classroom, we created a program called the Keystones Technology Integrators, not only giving these teachers orientation to how technology can change their classroom, but bringing them together in a learning community to learn from each other. We then built a very engaging connection to students through our middle school and high school computer fairs, which included a variety of mechanisms and technologies that gave student voice. We involved the community and businesses, and obviously, most importantly, parents, to recognize that they had to be involved in district planning. And then noting that there are already existing systems, we realized transformation only could come from creating integrated processes and building the infrastructure and bandwidth, which we did through a new law called the E-Fund. And all those were needed to undertake this high school reform. So just in wrapping up, what happened is we launched this program across all of the Commonwealth for all of the high schools, leveraging existing initiatives that I just highlighted. But we recognized also that every district's at a different place. And I think this is very much true across different states in China and in different schools in China, that recognizing where you are gives you a chance to understand where you can go and the planning requirement to make that possible. So a rural district would have a very different type of plan than an urban district, and a very large district would have a different type of plan than a small district. And so we recognized that some were more ready, and we created a 3-phase implementation where the most ready started the first year, and then those who were ready next learned from the first, and then the last group went learning from both phases that went ahead of them. All the while recognizing we could aggregate the purchasing power of all 501 school districts through a $250 million procurement for the hardware and software required, extensive professional support for these teachers with the instructional coaches that came from the program I mentioned on the slide before, the technology integrators. And ultimately, many policies had to change, supports had to change, and the school districts had to create their own total cost of ownership model to sustain the work beyond the grants. We heard that in the gaming situation where they're talking about what changes might happen to acceptable use policy, how technology is allowed to go home, or what parents' involvement would be and how that might change. So I'm going to stop here by just reminding all of us that ed technology provides the tools that can support learning to understand and create, to learn by collaborating, to support learning that takes place anytime, anywhere, any place, that supports learning by gaming, and you've heard about that already tonight, and to improve the management of classrooms and schools at all levels. And as I said before, remember that ed tech is a tool to enable things that haven't been possible before or to enhance existing ways, not as a goal unto itself. But the good news is with ed tech and now with online learning, expanding the possibilities, the future of teaching and learning is bright.
Thank you, Dr. Michael Golden. That's a very insightful speech. And thank you for sharing your practice in education innovation and education technology. And we will have a roundtable discussion at the end of this online education track, and we will speak with you 20 minutes later. Our final speaker of today's session is Dr. Hugh Kifong. He's an Associate Dean and Associate Professor at Faculty of Education, the University of Hong Kong. His research focuses on online pedagogy, instructional design, blended learning environment. His current projects include the effective use of gamification in higher education, identifying factors to improve flipped classroom implementation in higher education, engaging students in online learning. And now let's welcome Dr. Hugh.
Yes, good evening to colleagues in over in the United States, and good morning to everyone over the rest of the world here in Hong Kong, in China. So I will be sharing my screen. Okay. So hold on, I'm looking at. Great. So thank you for the first three speakers. They had been the most engaging conversation. So I will wrap up by this topic that I'm asked to share. Initially, when Alice Shuhan approached me through an email, I was wondering what in the world should I be talking? And then I was thinking, since everybody is stuck online, at least in many parts of Hong Kong, you may know the situation in Hong Kong, lockdown. So I was thinking, why not I just talk about how strategies to engage online learners. So I'll be talking more on the micro strategy. I know Michael Borden just now is talking about the macro. I will be talking more on the micro because this is the focus of my research. So I'm very glad to be here this evening or this morning, depending on where you are. And I'm from the University of Hong Kong. I will just start off by giving you a little bit more introduction about myself. I'm a Singapore citizen. So you can see that my first degree and my master's degree are all from the Nanyang Technological University, Nanyang理工大学 from Singapore. And I did my PhD at Indiana U. I don't have the money to go to U or Penn. So I have to go to Indiana because it's cheaper, all right? Penn is Ivy League. So you know the cost is double of that from Indiana U. So after that, I worked as a software engineer for 4 years, solving user problems. And that was where I started to get interested in user training. I remember once when I was sent to Thailand and I had to do a user training. The problem is I don't speak Thai and my audience don't speak English. And my boss says, no, you are paid to do your job, go and do your job. That was my introduction to the real world in the profit company where you are really thrown into the deep end of the pool to do your job. Well, I became a teacher after surviving 4 tough years, and I became an assistant professor, and I'm currently an associate professor at HKU. So my research focus is about this, what engages learners in blended or fully online settings. All right, so fully online learning, nothing new. I've been telling my students, hey, nothing new. The U of Phoenix has been doing online for so many years. So don't think that this is something strange. However, everybody should know that 91% of people don't want to teach fully online. This was the survey done in 2017 in the USA. So more than 10,000 faculty members. Nobody likes to teach. I'm not sure about you, but Hong Kong U is pretty conservative, and many people, many professors, many colleagues of mine don't like to teach online. And what about students? All right, again, more than 70% of students don't want to learn fully online. So, however, we know 2 years ago, in 2020, there's been a massive disruption, and up to now, in certain parts of the world, there is still a massive disruption going along. And if you have shares in Zoom, man, you're rich. I was just thinking, why don't I get an idea to do something like Zoom? I don't have to struggle with my salary now, right? You can see the annual meeting minutes from about 200 million now to about 2021, 3.3 trillion minutes. So, a lot of people has been going on, doing online lessons and online meetings, everything online. But I think most of us would know. Perhaps the University of Pennsylvania has very, very smart students who are pretty much engaged almost in every lesson. But unfortunately, in Hong Kong U and parts of Asia, we have this problem. Okay, so students are disengaged in online class. So right now, when you're listening to me, are you actually listening to me, or are you watching your screen? Are you looking at your phones? because what people normally do is to check emails. Well, I know Suhan is not checking email because she switched on her webcam and she's smiling at me, so I know that she's not checking email. But this is what normally people do, okay? And some of them also do daydreaming. So this is pretty upsetting if you are an instructor teaching online. You want them to focus on you, and yet they are not doing, they're not doing that. They're doing something else, but looking at your screen. So this is just a talk, okay? Are you paying attention? Hopefully you do. So the big question is, which I want to share given this limited time of about 20 minutes, how can we engage students in fully online learning? So tons of suggestions out there if you do Google. Dr. Google has given us a lot of suggestions. What are these? Well, you try setting rules, not many people will even bother listening to you, right? Well, again, not many people will even do that. You know, we have tried all kinds of stuff, right? Including myself and my colleagues over at HKU. Yes, we do these threads. If you don't, okay, you will not have enough marks and things like that. Even more activity. Well, during one class, I actually did that. And at the end of it, students complained in their student feedback in my class, the evaluation, the dreaded evaluation, where my salary, my performance is tied to my evaluation. And students says that, why is Dr. Hugh doing so many online activities? Wow. Do not think that giving students more activity will make them more engaged. So my question is, do they actually work? Would they be actually more active? Now, I'm sure there are other ways to do that. Okay, for example, you may use game-based learning or things. But since my research is on this thing called flipped learning or flipped classroom, depending on which term you prefer to use, I just want to focus the rest of my talk about this thing called flipped learning. Now, I won't go into this detail. Most of you know the structure of the flip, all right? So this has been flipped because what you do, you flip the lecture into the pre-class, and the homework activity, you put it into the classroom activity. And I look at this technology, most of them, they use videos, which is not surprising given many lecturers, many professors do record their video their lectures. Now, facts or myth? If this is a regular class, I will ask you for your response. But given that I only have a few minutes left, okay, is this a fact or a myth? This is a myth. Okay, it's not absolutely necessary, although many flipped classrooms use video. Does it actually replace face-to-face? Myth. It optimizes face-to-face teaching. Now, I must tell you something. I do not believe in flipped classroom many years ago. I started my research back in 2015. But as I did more and more research, I got more and more convinced about it. Is this a fact? Myth. This was the very first article, for those of you who may not be aware of, by Maureen Leach and colleagues back in the Journal of Economic Education in the year 2000. That was 22 years ago when they used the word inverting the classroom, not the flipped classroom. But the notion is the same. The idea is the same, all right? And back here, 2021, okay, it is still growing strong. So it is not a fad, okay? It is still very popular despite more than 22 years ago. Is it only good for certain subjects? No. All subjects. In my research, I've found that it works for almost for everything that I've seen. All right, it's either all or none. You either flip or you don't. This is a myth. Teachers can start by flipping just one lesson or one unit. And this is the biggest question of all. Is it more effective than traditional lecture? Because as professors, as instructors, we want to get to the bottom line. Tell me, is this better than my traditional lecture? If it is, I may consider. If it's not, forget about it. Let me stick to my lecture mode. All right. So the big question is, does it improve learning? and my ongoing research on flipped learning. So some of the research that I've been doing, so that was in health profession, this was in mathematics. What was this? Okay, yep, this was in also secondary school. Okay, and then the recent large study that I did was published in the Australian Asian. More than 156,000 participants. Overall effect size. Now, if you know something about statistics in education, this is considered a good effect size in favor of FC. So what is the overall conclusion? It's more effective. Using a structured assessment such as quiz at the beginning significantly increase the effect size. And it does increase students' interaction and participation. So far, so good. But there's always a, before I talk about that, I'll talk about the main models first. So there you can see the classic model or the fully online model. The classic model will be the same. Everything, this is done off campus. This will be done on campus. Now, the one that I use due to the pandemic is this. Off campus, in class as well, off campus. And I do have something called the post class, okay, to make students do more work. So you can see sometimes my students do complain, why are you giving us so much thing to do? But like I said, there's always a but somewhere when you deal with social sciences. Do you really think students look forward? Do you think instructors look forward? Okay, we got to be very honest, all right? Although the effect size seems positive, students dislike. All right, I feel I'm doing more work. I don't like watching. Who would like to watch? We like to watch movie. Okay, we like to watch Steven Spielberg movie, not video on statistics, man. That is like torturing, all right? And I have nobody to ask, what should I do? You know, I thought the instructor should teach me when I go to class. And an instructor, the same thing, takes much more effort, don't feel comfortable. So the dilemma, on one hand, it improves learning. On the other hand, not everyone likes. So what can you do? Okay, let me look at the time. Got about 10 more minutes. So I'm going to share with you some good practices. I have much more, many more. But because of time, let's talk about these three things. And then we are done. The first thing is practice one. How do we manage mindsets? And then how do we manage the video lectures? Remember, these are lectures. These are not movies, all right? And how do we manage motivation? Right, now the first thing is the mindset, which is your attitude towards it. Do you believe that the mindset is the most important thing? If you change mindset, the behavior will change. I'm sure many of you will fully agree with this statement. Many people, including instructors, are familiar with the traditional, therefore difficult to change. Although the pandemic did force many people to change their mindset, you know, they had to change. But given the chance, most people will still prefer to go back to the traditional lectures. Like I said, to change behavior, change the mindset first. What's the secret ingredient in flipped classroom? It's not the magic of flipping, you know, it's the active learning. This is the secret ingredient that not many people talk about. So what in the world is this active learning thing? Active learning can be defined simply as anything that requires student direct participation. So right now, you are not direct. Many of you are not direct participating in my lecture now. You are watching, you are listening. This is called passive. If I ask you to do something in the chat box, then it is an active learning. For example, if I ask everyone in the audience to write something in the text, do you agree about the advantage of active learning? And then you need to type something in the chat box. That forces you to reflect and to write out, and that is called an active learning. But if I just ask, if you just watch and listen to me, that is not an active learning activity. Now you need to see the active learning, and I'm not deceiving you. These are all fantastic papers published in the Proceeding of the National Academy of Science, PNAS. Okay, you may find all these things. Active learning increases student performance in science, engineering, mathematics. You know, what about non-STEM subjects? Some of you may argue. Oh, just wait a minute. I have the citation for you. Active learning and grammar learning engages overlapping brain networks. Okay, even in grammar learning. Okay, now this is important. Very interesting statistics published in PNAS that shows that students in classes with traditional lecturing were 1.5 times more likely to fail than students in classes with active learning. So, yet students don't like active learning. Now, this is another fantastic paper published by colleagues in Harvard University, a very famous enough university, published in again the top journal in our field, PNAS, measuring actual learning versus feeling of learning. Now, the statistic might surprise you. Active learning actually learn more, but they feel they learn less. Let me show you the statistics. Test of learning, can you see here? This is the measurement of actual learning. This one is passive, this is active. Passive, okay? Active, the darker color is active. Passive means the students mainly in the lecture mode. The instructor give a lecture and the students listen. Active means the students have to do some peer discussion. So they learn more. All these are statistically significant results. But what about the feeling? I enjoy this lecture, the passive one more. I feel I learned a great deal from this lecture, the passive one feel more. The instructor was effective at teaching. The passive students felt more. And this is, I wish all my physics classes were taught like this, the passive one. So beware when you use active learning. The students may give you poorer student feedback of your evaluation. And then that might affect your performance increase. So students actually learn more in the active, but they feel they learn less. Can you see it? Okay. So what did we learn? Humans are like electric current. This is my thought. The path of least resistance. What does that mean? All of us like easy effort. We don't like to go through struggles. We prefer to straight away ask people rather than trying to struggle through the problem in our own ways. We don't like cognitive struggle, to be very honest. Okay. So, according to the author of that paper, success of active learning will be greatly enhanced if students accept that it leads to deeper learning. That means not all learning should be easy. In fact, when I think about my own life, you know, there's a subject that I don't like during my undergrad studies, which is the subjects of statistics. I struggled through it. At the end of it, I got a grade of B. B for boy. I was very pleased because I thought I did decent well. But less than 1 month later, I've forgotten completely all that I've learned about the subject of statistics. Absolutely nothing. I don't even know what's the purpose of a standard deviation, although I know how to calculate the formula. All the way until my PhD study in Indiana, where suddenly I was confronted with a problem. How do I know these two groups are actually different? Or is it just due to lucky chance? And that was where my struggle with statistics actually began. What do you mean by struggle? I learned it on my own. And that was where I did cognitive struggle. In other words, I learned active learning on my own, self-directed learning. And up to now, I really understand when and where I use, why and when I use statistics. Okay, this is my personal experience. I'm not sure about you, but you may agree or you may disagree. But in general, I see that what even if you feel that you learn more, it doesn't mean that you actually learn more. The next thing is video lectures, because video lectures constitute such a major part in flipped classroom. Whether we like it or not, video lectures will be here to stay. Nobody likes to read books. Nobody likes to just watch PowerPoint slides. People want to watch videos. Okay, how to get students, reduce them from daydreaming? You know, there's a famous study that talks about here, insert memory tests. Again, published in the PNAS. I like that journal because they do a lot of fantastic experiments. I'm a sucker for experiment now, you know. They really do very strong experiment. And see, test, you know, videos, for example, if you had a video about 5 minutes or 6 minutes long, after the first minute, for example, put in a quiz. This is what it means by inserting the memory test into the quiz. So this is a test. Restudy means watch the video again and no test. Mind wandering is another term for daydreaming. You're dreaming about what you're going to have for lunch. It's almost 10:30 now. Why is Dr. Hugh talking so long? Okay, so mind wandering. So if you have tests, it reduces the mind wandering. And if you put memory tests, it also significantly increases the amount of correct responses that are learning compared to watching the video again. So what does this study tell us? Never ask your students to rewatch the video lectures. It does nothing good. Okay, it's as good as nothing. So rather than asking your students to watch your video lecture again, put memory tests into the video itself, because it forces students to concentrate on the lectures. Another one published by Science, okay? So I'm showing you all the top journals in our field, not just in our field, in the whole world. Retrieval practice, which is nothing more than just a quiz, produces more learning than elaborative studying with concept mapping. Now, some of you may disagree. Well, I encourage you to read this paper by Capical and Blunt, and there's a response, somebody argue it, and I love the way Capical and Blunt responded to the critics. You should read the paper published in 2011. Retrieval, practicing retrieval memory test produces greater gains than meaningful learning. In meaningful learning, compared to concept mapping. Okay, so I'll leave it to you whether, okay, to read it if you're interested. Another thing I was asked by many people is, should I create my own videos or use YouTube? Should I create my own videos or should I just use somebody else from YouTube? Because many instructors, they feel shy to see their own face on videos. What does the literature say? Published in Computers in Education, Melissa Bond, okay, formerly from the University of College London, UCL, one of the top institute of education in the field. I see Suhan nodding her head, so she knows UCL. Well, Melissa Bond found that instructor videos are found to be more appealing than videos that do not feature instructor. However, you don't need to create your own videos all the time. You can also use somebody else. But rather than using somebody else all the time, it's good to have your own occasionally. Try digital handwriting. Now, because of time, I did not use the digital handwriting. You can have a pen like this. Okay, you can have a pen like this. This is a digital pen. Okay, and you can write on the screen. All right. Why? Khan style tutorial, which is digital writing, has more median engagement than just slide. Where does this study come from? This is a study by MIT. Now, everybody trusts MIT research. And they found this data from at least 6 million video clips. Okay, they analyze. MIT has the money to do all these detailed analysis. And they found out that if you use Khan writing, it does engage students more than just PowerPoint. And you do need to maintain student interest. Okay, don't just talk theory. All right. So how can you trigger? So some time ago, back in 2018, I published a paper in Teachers College Record. All right, unpacking the strategies of 10 highly rated MOOCs, implications of engaging students in large online courses. So for those of you, Teachers College belongs to Columbia University. So this is what I found. Okay, problem-centric learning with clear exposition is the most frequently mentioned factor that engage students. What do you mean by that? Okay, relevant examples, interesting tips, and sometimes include guest speaker into the video lectures. Does help. Okay, I'm about to wind down now. Okay, finally, I'm going to skip through very fast about managing motivation. I'm going to use something called meaningful gamification. Okay, I'm aware that Professor Plus has mentioned about game-based learning, but unlike him, I don't have the money to design game-based learning. Okay, I only use gamification. However, I use something called meaningful gamification. What does that mean? Careful alignment with learning objectives and game elements. And I do consider not just extrinsic, but the intrinsic motivation. Now, I have been working on this thing since 2015. That was 7 years ago. So we propose a theory-driven model, intrinsic motivators, goal setting, self-determination theory, flow theory, extrinsic, social comparison, behavior reinforcement theory, our good friend Skinner. Okay, some of you will do know who Skinner is. Okay, to cut the whole story short, okay, if you want this, send me an email. I will send you the paper where I got this paper. This is the model that we use: goal, assess, give them challenges, give them collaboration, and give them feedback, and some of the elements that we use: points, badges, options, so on and so forth. Okay, I'm going to very briefly just show you a study that we are still analyzing. We got a control group and experiment group. Both are fully online flipped classroom. We have rules: switch on your webcam, switch on your webcam. We have participation grades as well. This is non-gamified, this is gamified. Will participants be more active in a gamified, fully online flipped classroom? Okay, so this is how we did the goal. How we implemented goal, autonomy, feedback, challenges, and collaboration. Okay, I don't have time to go this in detail. We are still in the process of trying to write this out for publication, but this is some of the things that we've done. These are the in-class Zoom class session. This is out of class, because flipped classroom have both in-class and out of class, and we do have this out of class thing. All right. So we analyze their pre-class activity using different levels, level 0 to the highest level, which is level 3. All right. And this is what we found. Okay, for the different pre-class activity, we found that the treatment group has more higher level than the control group. Okay, so you can see level 2 is this, level 3 is this. Okay, more than the control group. And what surprises us is that in the in-class Zoom participation, the treatment group has significantly positive student participation in the in-class lesson compared to the control group. So main findings, we've realized that getting them, begging them, threatening them to switch on webcam is not sufficient. Students can just say that they ignore you. My camera is not working. Rewards, also not sufficient. But surprisingly, giving them a theory-driven gamification, give them some sort of challenge, is an effective method to engage students. However, you do need to be careful. You cannot just use game elements superficially. You need to carefully align it with the learning objectives. And of course, intrinsic motivation is something that is important as well. And with that, I'm going to end. So in summary, I briefly talk about these 3 practices, and I want to end by saying there are many more practices. Okay, I just focus on these 3. So thank you for listening. With that, I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you, Dr. Hugh. That was very perspective and engaging keynote speech. And I'm sure our audience have gained a lot of inspirations from your talk. And welcome Dr. Michael Golden to come back. Next, it will be our second roundtable discussion for our online education track. And now I will pass it to my colleague, Mingjian. Hello, Mingjian.
Hi. Okay, so welcome back, guys. Welcome back to the second roundtable with the last section of today. So just like the previous one, we will be first answering some questions, and then we will find whether the audience has questions for you guys. So let's get started. The first question I have for you guys is, as we all know, during the pandemic, a lot of students have studied online, but according to some teachers, so the whole online learning part made many students struggle with learning. So a lot of teachers reported that the students are bad at particular subjects or skills. So how can future educators prepare their students to know how to effectively learn online? Dr. Golden, do you have something to share?
Sure. Well, I guess the premise of the question is that all of a sudden, within a week, every single campus was depopulated. And that doesn't give you a lot of preparation. Some schools thrive, some universities thrive because they were prepared. They had online programs, they had blended or synchronous components, they had the infrastructure and technology, and many struggled. 1, because their teachers and educators hadn't been prepared. 2, in many cases, there were no connections at home. There were no devices, there was no connectivity or internet. In some cases, particularly most underserved families, 1 laptop is being shared among 4 or 5 children, all in a very small 1-room apartment. We had many university professors, university presidents who had to deploy technology to the field, but also at the same time had to do things like worry about their students being able to eat and have housing insecurity and other things that happened in this time. So I think the circumstances were unusual. The opportunity is, as Dr. Hugh talked about, is to really think about and understand, how do you design robust learning environments? How do you design and create the opportunity to have students at the center of the work? And he gave lots of data and statistics about how essential questions and a need to know, intrinsic motivation, supported the learning of these students. He gave very specific examples and cases of where relevant, authentic work mattered, tied to their interests. And he gave a lot of experiences of how 1 lecture that's boring in person isn't going to translate well to a video, that you have to use other things like interactivity and quizzes. And as we know, for online learning, particularly over Zoom, breakout rooms and Padlets and polling capabilities and a lot of other things to make sure that students are active learners. So what we really need to do is have the wherewithal to have enough professional development for teachers, for some capability to have the infrastructure for teachers, whether they be university or K-12, and then how they might share the instructional solution with their students. He gave very clear advice that it's about the mindset. And when we have young people come to school when they're 4 or 5, by the time they're 18 or 20 and they go to university, they can do school pretty well. They've learned how to be passive learners, as active as required, to sit in the front row, raise your hand, answer a question, and get an A. And that's not what we're producing. If we want to produce, that's what we should produce if we're trying to produce learners for the 4th Industrial Revolution, where you actually have to be prepared to take ownership of solving a problem, where you have to be collaborative with others, And all the data and statistics and studies that Dr. Hugh presented create this evidence that we need to have a variety of things, including flipped models, asynchronous and synchronous models, huge significant support for teachers, helping them understand how and why they can bring apps and engagement and motivation to the students, and where they can also build community. One of the things that I know all of our faculty was very made concerted efforts around is building community, especially if you haven't had the chance to meet your students in person and you start class remotely. So they didn't know each other, they had to get to know each other, they had to get to know the faculty member. And that's very much true at all grades and all levels that the teachers have had to be challenged with. So I think those are just some of the suggestions of how we can improve. Hopefully we won't have a pandemic where we depopulate campuses in 1 week, but we'll have the gradual improvement of systems so that we're designing learning environments that are vibrant and exciting.
Yeah, that is actually a really good suggestion. I am really glad that the Penn Catalyst has provided like the educational solutions to help teachers to know how to better teach online, to transform them into digital teaching. So I believe like programs like this will definitely help prepare teachers so that they can help their students to know how to effectively study online.
Exactly.
So,
we have to empower them. We have to empower these teachers and say, you know, what you may have learned in school in a passive way, and we often do our practice based on the way we learned, the way we were taught, that we have a different and better way to think about it.
Dr. Hugh, do you have anything to add?
Okay, I want to reaffirm Dr. Golden's point about the lack of professional treatment, professional development for many instructors. I have some students complaining to me that some of their professors spend 2 to 3 hours just talking, reading off the PowerPoint on the video lectures. You can just imagine how mind-boring that can be. So if you just ask students to sit and listen, you're going to lose them. Now, I didn't show you statistics, but I can tell you, you can lose them less than 5 minutes into it. Okay, to be honest, even 3 minutes, you finish, they're off. Okay, because nowadays, youngsters nowadays, they have very short attention span. They like simulation, they like new stuff. I did not mention about another practice in my lecture just now. There's another practice called how to give online feedback. Now, one of the biggest complaints students have is that the lack of feedback from instructors. Now, in a face-to-face, you can watch their face, you can see their face, you know, and you can see whether who is struggle. But if in an online class and nobody is switching on the cam, you don't even know. And sometimes when you ask them to do work online, how are you going to give them feedback? Are you going to expect the professor to be there 24/7, which is impossible? Some of you may say, why not I ask peer feedback? But come on, man, be honest. Peer feedback is completely different from instructor feedback. And some students, they wrote to me, they said that I pay money to hear your feedback, not from somebody else, my classmates' feedback. The feedback may be useful, but ultimately I want to hear the professor feedback because I pay X amount of money to attend your class. Now, we do have that kind of student over in HKU, okay? So our students are pretty demanding. So, you know, 2 ways I've been doing, and I found these 2 ways are quite useful. I will very briefly share it. The first thing is, never depend on email, never depend on the discussion forum, because the response rate for those are very slow. What I've been using for the past few years is something called the mobile instant messaging, either WhatsApp or WeChat. And because most of my students are from mainland China, I tell you, using WeChat can get a response rate in less than 5 minutes. That's the one. And second thing I have been doing, innovative way, is to use a chat bot. Not our chat box, but a chat bot, an artificial intelligence machine. Now that machine can only be as smart with the amount of data you feed it in. So if you have frequently asked questions from students in your past classes, okay, you can feed that thing into the machine will learn, and the machine can help you answer questions. Now, one of my PhD students is doing that, and the results is pretty positive. So I'm very encouraged by that one. But that one is still something that I'm still learning because it's a new technology. And the biggest challenge I have is how to make the chatbot smart enough and not a dumb machine. Because students can realize, are they talking to a stupid machine or are they talking to an intelligent machine? So I think you also need to deal with online feedback. Okay, online feedback is something important.
All right, good. Definitely. We definitely need a lot of like feedback from not only the instructor but also the system, every stakeholder from the system to enforce us to tell the students whether we are doing the right way or the wrong way. So probably in the future, I'm expecting there are going to be more educational technology that is going to shape how people learn online effectively in the future. So unfortunately, we are running almost out of time, and I would like to still thank you all for attending tonight, especially thank you, Dr. Golden and Dr. Hugh, for your precious time. And I will pass to my colleague.
Yeah. Thank you, Minjian, and thank you, Dr. Michael, Dr. Hugh, for the insightful discussions. And unfortunately, we don't have time for more questions, but we will be happy to share your questions and your comments with speakers and get in touch soon. Please be on the lookout for any of our future events. And if you are planning on attending the PCES and other panels, please see our agenda. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to contact us at pennpces@gmail.com. On behalf of Penn China Education Summit and our speakers, thank you for joining us today and have a good rest of the day and enjoy the spring. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Golden. Thank you, Dr. Hugh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, have a good day, guys.
You too.
好的，各位与会人员，谢谢参与。我们今天的教育科技峰会，教育科技板块就暂时先到此结束。欢迎各位再次关注我们之后的教育，公平、教育多元、早期教育以及职业教育的分论坛。